In 1996, a man named Mantak Chia wrote this book, The Multi-Orgasmic Man. And on page 26 of the original version of this book, there's a graph that shows what it would look like to have an orgasm without ejaculation, and then to have more full body orgasms over and over and over again that feel better than ejaculatory orgasm. This blew my mind the first time I saw this book, because I was struggling with premature ejaculation, and the concept of even lasting 20 minutes in sex was just, it felt totally impossible for me. So the idea of having multiple orgasms was like, holy shit, this is the holy grail of sex. I want this. How do I do this? And so I read this book and I started practicing things. And honestly, I didn't get very far. It was really confusing for me, and it took me a lot of years to understand it. So in this video, I'm going to clearly explain to you what is actually beyond the ejaculatory reflex point on this chart. I'm going to tell you my own personal experiences with it, and then some techniques on how you can get there yourself. But first, let's just look at this chart one more time, because it's really interesting. On the left-hand side here, we have the pleasure axis. On the right-hand side, we have time. And if you look right here, what I'm circling on screen right now, this is where the typical ejaculatory orgasm happens. And then on this chart, you can go up and up and up and up, meaning you can experience more pleasure in your body than the typical ejaculatory orgasm. And like I said, this blew my mind the first time I heard this, and also it was kind of impossible for me to actually experience this. It took me years to figure this stuff out. On the left-hand side, it says, pleasure primarily felt in your genitals down here, pleasure expanding up your spine, pleasure floods your brain, pleasure pulses through your entire body, boundaries between you and your partner dissolve. This is the space of the tantric orgasm. Up here, possible transformation of consciousness. That's some really big stuff. This is such a crucial thing that all men should understand. There's so much more pleasure available to you in sex besides just the typical ejaculatory orgasm. So the three things that really helped me get there and really helped me open this up were willpower, mindset, and technique. And I'm going to share my own personal experiences with those three things right now. Number one is willpower. If you're a guy, you know that when the urge to ejaculate comes up during sex or masturbation, it's strong, and there's this gravitational force that pulls you towards it, and it feels like it's the best thing you could possibly do in that moment and nothing else matters. I've done that many times. And when I think back to the most incredible sexual experiences of my life, they all have had that decision point in the sexual experience where I experienced that pull, that hook to ejaculate, and I took a breath and paused and chose to go the other direction. So next time you're having sex or next time you're masturbating, I encourage you to experiment with noticing when that urge to ejaculate comes up and then making a decision to not do it. Even if you're later in the sexual experience and your mind starts to think, oh, now would be a good time to ejaculate, try not ejaculating. And then do some of the techniques that I'll share in some of my other videos. I'll link to those in the description to help move that sexual energy through your body so you can last longer. But just see what happens if you continue having sex or continue masturbating after that point. All kinds of other doors of pleasure will probably open up for you when you make that decision point. Because when you make that decision point, you're breaking a huge piece of programming that so many of us have in our society around sex, which is that sex is just a means to an end, to have an orgasm, to have a release, and then to be done. This brings me to point number 2, which is mindset. This is the other thing, the second thing that will help you get into those upper realms of pleasure. The mindset here that I'm talking about is approaching sex from a different fundamental viewpoint than what most people traditionally approach sex from. Most people look at sex as the means to an end, to achieve orgasm, to get off. That is one mindset of sex. The other mindset that I'm talking about here is going into sex without the goal of orgasm on the table at all. Maybe you have an orgasm, maybe you don't. Maybe your partner does, maybe they don't. And this does require a massive fundamental shift internally. I want to acknowledge that. The shift is massive. But when you make this shift and when you go into sex as an exploration of pleasure, of connection, of energy, of touch, and you don't focus on orgasm, all kinds of other amazing stuff can happen. And maybe you do have an orgasm. Maybe you have one of those non-ejaculatory orgasm experiences that are incredible. Probably not the first time, but eventually with training you can get there. And the key is to have the mindset switch from the typical focus towards peak orgasm to just the exploration of it. And the third thing is technique. And that brings me back to the chart. If you look here again on this graph, the line for the typical ejaculatory orgasm goes up over the point of no return and back down. But the other line that goes up and up and up to the realm of multiple whole body orgasms without ejaculation, that actually goes under the peak pleasure of ejaculatory orgasm. This is something that didn't make sense to me for a long time. And what I had to learn was that edging, staying up here near the peak, was not actually the thing that brought me up into these higher states of pleasure. I actually had to get more comfortable with pleasure in the 50 to 80% range of arousal. If we're using the scale of 0 to 100 is 0 not aroused, 100 is ejaculatory orgasm, and 95 is the point of no return. And then when I incorporated other techniques like using the microcosmic orbit and breath and sound and movement and just feeling my full animal aliveness, that started to open up other doors in my system as well. That started to open up sexual energy flow throughout my whole body, not just in my genitals. And I started to feel it moving up my spine and moving into my heart and moving out through my fingertips. And I had all these wild, crazy experiences. This is a much shorter version of the full story. But the key was to practice different techniques to spread sexual energy throughout my body. And yes, then I did have a full body non-ejaculatory orgasm. Then yes, I did have multiple non-ejaculatory orgasms, and it blew my mind. And I practiced this more and more and more and more, and it started to transform my whole life, in addition to the practice of semen retention. Just for the record, I also do still love having ejaculatory orgasms, and it's part of my sexual experience, my sexual model as well, that I think is really healthy for men, but I think it shouldn't be the default. You can have ejaculatory orgasms, you can have non-ejaculatory orgasms. I like to have sex without ejaculating semi-regularly so that when I do eventually have an ejaculatory orgasm, it's in line with the frequency that's ideal for my age that they also talk about in this book, so that I can reserve that release and instead harness it and transmute it and integrate it into my body so I can use it as fuel in life to create the life that I want. I have a free training for this. It's a free ejaculation control guide. It's in the description of this video. And also, if you just want to skip that and go on to the thing that's going to help you get here the fastest, check out my Orgasmic Mastery course. And I do want to say that it is fundamentally different from what's in this book. It incorporates all the different trainings that I've taken from around the world, all the different best parts, and the best of Western practical science as well. There's a group starting this week. I would love for you to join. If you have any questions about that, or if you have any questions about anything I shared in this video, definitely leave a comment below, and I would love to clarify as much as I can here. This is what I recommend watching next. It'll give you some more tools and techniques to move beyond just what I talked about here. I will see you there.